Hello, so today I thought we'd have a little bit of a play with some gesso. I've got PBO Studio Acrylics gesso, which is quite a light, thin gesso. I've got 3 panels here. This is grey board. It's the back of a notepad. It's quite thick, it's probably about 1 millimetre thick. I've got a piece of watercolour heavy paper light card. It's about 224 GSM, and that's got a full coverage of gesso. My paintbrush was a little bit messy, so it must not have been cleaned properly, so I've got a few streaks, but it doesn't matter. And this is just watercolour, same watercolour thin card, thick paper, with nothing on it, no gesso at all. I'll start with these two. This one, well, both of them, I'm going to ink up with 2 different colours of Distress Oxides. Now I've got ripe persimmon and I've got fossilised amber, just because I like these 2 colours together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ink up with this brush half of each one with the ripe persimmon and half with fossilised amber, and it will blend where they overlap because I'm working with colours which are same colour family. It doesn't matter if they overlap. Trying not to get my fingers on where I've got the ink and then I don't leave fingerprints. I quite like these brushes because you can get a quite subtle effect and then build it up rather than a very bright, I'll move that out of the way at the moment, colour to set off with. As you can see, it does take colour differently, the gessoed one to the ungessoed one. This watercolour paper card, whatever, has got a little bit of texture to it. Not a lot, but just a little. So we've got about half done of each. Put that brush away for now. And then we'll go on to the fossilised amber. Now I've got ink on my glass mat, so I might end up picking a little bit of that up, but it doesn't matter particularly. I'll just spin them round. What I'll do is I'll just put a scrap piece of paper across the bottom so I don't get finger marks in the orange. And I'll do there, we overlap it with quite a nice colour as well, and we'll pick some of the orange off the glass mat as well, which will help it to blend. This is the gessoed one. Sorry about the squeak. And again, a reasonable amount of ink on there. It's quite easy to tell the difference which is the one with gesso and which isn't. This, you can see the texture more. That one is flatter because it's got a full coverage of gesso. So I'll just move those out of the way while I wipe that background glass mat off. Normally I would pick that ink up with a bit of water so I didn't waste it, but it just saves time just to wipe it at the moment. Right, so this is the one with gesso and distress ink on it, Distress Oxide, and here I've got a jam jar and it has got water and just a very, very, very cheap shower gel in it. I'm going to mix it up so the shower gel is all the way through the water. quite good to get a coloured shower gel, because then you can tell which of your jam jars has got shower gel in and which hasn't. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of the water and just splash it randomly onto our background. Now I hope you can see that you get quite a dramatic effect. Partly it is because it's the impact, because if you just do like I did and just blob a little bit on, you don't get the same effect. But you get a starburst effect where the ink is driven away by the water. But the shower gel, I think, makes just a little bit of a difference. So I'll very carefully move that to the top. Get rid of our shower gel. Bring back our piece of watercolour card, which has got just, move that around a little bit, just the ink on, no gesso. I'm going to put a little bit of gesso just on my glass mat, because I will need this for a couple of things. Put that away. And I'm going to use my spatula, my palette knife, and just pick up a little bit on the end. I don't have to get my fingers in the ink. So you get a little bit on. I'm then going to just add it over the top. Now I don't want big areas, I just want little tiny areas of where it's picked the gesso up. If I'm honest, that is a bit too much of a big area, but I can try and sort of match it with a couple of other big areas, and then it won't be as sort of conspicuous. As I say, I'm just picking up little bits. It's better to build it up gradually than it is go with big splodges. Now it does depend on your colours as to how dramatic effect this is. Obviously with darker colours you get a lot more contrast. But you can see, hopefully, you get a nice mottled effect. Now sometimes, whoops, I keep dropping it, the gesso will sort of absorb a little bit of the colour, and the colour will come through the gesso. You can probably see on this big patch here, it sort of absorbs into the gesso, but that all adds to the effect. I tend to like the corners with a bit more gesso on. There we are. So that's an alternative one. It's distress inks or distress oxides, but it's actually a bit more textural, but without, it's still flat. So if you're posting things, cards made with this effect, it is still flat. But it just makes it look almost like a sort of a old plastered wall where the colour's falling off. So that's our second area, our second idea. Our first one is nicely drying. You can see these lovely starburst effects you get. For our next one, I've got our gesso still, and I've got our piece of grey board. And again, I just want to add areas of gesso. Not everywhere. I want some gaps, I tend to go linear, sort of, rather than haphazard. I tend to go, it's easier I think to go one way. I want a fair bit of the area covered, and definitely the edges I like to be covered, and the corners. Doesn't matter if you've got bigger areas this time with gesso on, but you do need some uncovered areas. So I think that'll do. Just pop some of, it's got a bit of gesso left, so I'll just pop it onto a spare card. Spatula in the wash for now. I'll just let that dry for a few seconds while I wipe this off. Clean up our area. Just give it a quick blast. I'd normally wait for it to completely dry because I can feel it isn't, but that's fine for this purposes. This is a Stabilo oil pencil. It's water reactive, so if I add water to it, it will do interesting things. The oil means that it's suitable for glass, metal, paper, all sorts of areas. So it's a wonderful tool. I tend to use it for shading and if I want to outline something. But with this technique, I'm just going to go with the flat side of the pencil around the edges. All the way around. And then some areas I will also go over, mainly where I haven't got any gesso. Again, just use the flat side of the nib, the point of your pencil. Put a nice lot in the corners. A little bit on there. Try not to get lines if you can. You can manage to avoid lines, it's good. Right, so you can see, let's make sure they're out of the way, and then we'll just spritz with a mini mister just with water in it. All over. There we are. And you can see how much pigment is in the pencil. There's a nice lot of pigment. You can go in with a brush and move it about. If you think there's areas that want a bit more darkness, just move it about a little. You can also just tip it up and the water will make the pigment run. And if you can see, it's running. But it highlights all the lovely, lovely texture that was created with the gesso. Because the gesso acts as a resist, you can see that the pigment hasn't gone into the background. You can dab away as much or as little as you want. But as you can see, it's got some lovely texture now. I'll give it a quick blast. You would normally completely dry this now. sure our background's dry. There we are. And then we'll just get my Daler. I've got this Daler Rowney gesso as well. I have different gessos for different things. I actually like this one because it's a little bit thicker. It's got a little bit more body. So it's horses for courses, it depends what you want. This ideally would be completely dry, but then I'm just going to go over the top again with a bit more gesso to give it a little bit more texture, because the grey board has absorbed quite a lot of the black and the gesso has gone a little bit grey in places, so I can now add little bits of highlights with some thicker gesso. Just gather that up, don't want to waste it. There we are. So it's highlighted areas with the true white of the gesso, so that gives it another sort of depth to the texture, sort of the textured look about it. So if we can see there, when that dries, that'll be a lovely background for an ATC or a tag, anything like that. You can actually do some nice crisp black stamping on the top of it when it's completely dry. If you've got heavier body gesso, you can actually stamp into it with your stamps while it's wet, but make sure that you immediately clean your stamp or else it will ruin it, because the gesso will stick to it. So that is our last background. That was our second one, and this is our first one. Completely different, but all using one simple supply, which was gesso. So I hope you like that, and I hope you give it a... So I've finished the 3 tags. I've just done very, very simple tags, just so you can see what sort of effects they look as a background. This one, I've just done one of my cardboard stencils, which I've made into faux metal. Some floristry wire just wrapped round, curled, and a little bit of gilding wax, and then some of my rusty paper clips. I've added a little bit of stamping in black and some gilding wax just round the edges. Punched a hole and got the reinforcers round it. So that's just a really, really simple background and a nice tag. This one, I've done a little bit of black stamping just to give it a bit of depth. Just some mark making with the same colour ink pad, just here and here. Some just artificial flowers, foliage, and a little bit of cheesecloth glued on, and I've just used some of the same ink onto the flowers. I did go around the edge with the same ink that I've used on here, just so that it gives it an outline and a bit of a frame. And this last one, this is quite a delicate background, so I've got on for a paper doily, a couple of postage stamps and some vintage papers, and just a little paper clip journal tag just glued on. So that would be nice to add to a present as well. So that just gives you some ideas on how to finish them off. Of course you can go a lot more overboard than this, but this was just to give you a simple idea.